Justin Harris again this week, and welcome to our Race Week athlete briefing here for the half marathon. So, before we get started on our kind of half marathon briefing, I think as many people know, Justin's going to be our kind of shepherd here of the spring challenge. So, I want to take a minute before we get started. And, Justin, if it's all right, let you kind of talk a little bit about what people can expect coming up here in a few weeks in the spring.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So for the Spring Run Challenge, what we're looking at is it's going to be another 8 week kind of build. And the focus is going to be the long run. And so just building off what we do in the winter, it's not really nice outside in a lot of places. So, it's a great opportunity to work on speed. So coming off speed, it's a great opportunity to build some volume as it's getting nicer outside for most of the country, right? So one of the focal points will be the long run and just how to take different approaches on the long run. I get asked from like, should I just go and run slow or should I practice pacing? And there's no wrong answer, but there are wrong ways to approach all those, right? So we're going to try to tackle some long run focal things, and that will be the main focus. We're going to also try to introduce some like on the easier options, some walk jogging. I had talked to, it's come across a couple times of like some people are walk joggers and they're trying to make it fit for them. So try to give a little bit more support there to capture a little bit wider audience. And so those will be the focal points. We'll still stay with a similar structure of like kind of Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday being the key days. So yeah, long run focus, building on the speedy stuff.
Yeah, I love a long run focus. I was telling Justin, I don't think it's something we've done a lot here, so it'll be a cool opportunity to bring in a new training stimulus. And Justin, you'll be proud. I did race the mile last night and
Oh yeah.
5 by 200 in a relay. So
Ooh, oh, the 10,000 meter relay.
yeah,
I've done that before. It's not easy.
10 by 5 by 2. So we had a little bit of fun there. But well, thanks for that preview. And just one more thing before we like jump into the main set of it. It is race week. Now, at least I'm here in New York City. I don't know, Justin, if you're coming in this weekend, but we're definitely going to do our team Ulpers kind of usual New York City half marathon shakeout run this Saturday morning at 10 a.m. in and around Columbus circles. The details will be posted. Justin, will we see you there also?
Yeah, I'm planning on being there. So
All right,
I think it's up on the
fantastic.
socials. So
Awesome. Well, let's jump into race week workouts here. So, I love starting a race week with a progression run, but without prompting Justin, Justin doesn't have to agree with me. But however, I was going to ask you kind of just your feeling on the start to a race week. Do you like kind of a tune-up workout? If so, what are the pros? What are the cons? Any tips, alternate ideas, etc.?
yeah. So I think for me, and again, there's no wrong way, but um, well, excuse me, I should say there's a lot of different approaches. There are wrong ways to do it. And I think the mistakes that people make is they just kind of leave the race out on the training runs, the last couple training runs to like see where they're at and how
Mhm.
much pace can I hit and where, like how good do I feel? And as a coach, I think we all say like, I wish I can sprinkle, magic pixie dust on them to like make the week magical and everything feel easy and then go into confidence into the race. So my big focus, I think, is like I try to keep with a similar structure. I might shift the second workout of the week in a day to give a little bit more rest if there's travel and stuff like that. But I tend to keep the same structure, so I'll have something thresholdy in there, and I'll have a little bit of VO2 max like intensity. So I tend to do intensity on Mondays, and so I'll leave that there. But if we like, I cut it almost by like 75%. And
Okay.
I tell people, do not crush these minute on, minute offs. Like you're used to doing 10 or 8, and I give you 4. Like it doesn't give you free reign because you feel great to like light it up and get sore or leave it out there, right? So it's just like trying to get little bits of intensity as we're going in is the focus for the week without searching for confidence, I call it. Like we've done the work. So I've seen threshold stuff like where people do that earlier in the week as well.
Mhm.
Just to kind of get maybe, especially for the longer races, a little bit more. Um, how do I say it? Like closer to race pace or effort and stuff like that.
Mhm.
For sure. So they're all all good modalities for sure.
Fair. And yes, for our half marathoners here, they've got a little progression runs. The idea is just to get, it's much shorter than our usual, our midweeks, but just one last kind of touch at pace before we go into the weekend. Because that second run of the week, we're going to have pulled it way, way back outside of just a couple little easy strides to try to stay connected. So that's going to be your last opportunity to just briefly touch that race pace before the weekend there.
Mhm.
So, yeah, as I mentioned, workout two, just a real nice, easy one. So, as Justin was saying, the pitfall here is to try to do too much, and you need to kind of resist that urge and kind of go for the path of less here. All the training's done at this point. You just got to get rested, got to get healthy, and to the starting line. So, speaking of which, so last week we talked a little bit about like kind of test week, race week, etc. Of like kind of the tips and tricks to come in, nothing new. But I want to talk about like race day in particular and kind of race day strategies. So first off, very important one, any race day kind of superstitions or rituals?
Oh, for me,
Yeah.
oh, not really. I'm just always like excited for it, ready for the challenge. I'm trying to think. I mean, I tend to try to do the similar stuff, like not anything different. So I always like go buy like oatmeal packets and get those going, and get my bottles ready the night before. And then, like you saw, I left them at the house. And on a hot day, had less liquids and fuel that I want. So just making sure I like all my stuff in my race bag is ready to go, and water bottles didn't make the bag. So yeah, so I say the tradition is oatmeal. Yeah. How about you? What, any superstitions or?
I think I just make sure I like to get my bib pinned on the night before, unless I'm doing like morning pickup. I want to make sure it's straight and nice because I don't want to be out there all kind of crooked and catty cornered.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes too, just the edge will start like kind of catching with the watch and the
Mm,
band. So I want to make sure it's like nice and flat, so it's not bugging me and I'm yanking into it in the
yeah.
middle of the race. But I think that's my big one. But I definitely do the like was like the full flat layout. I take like the top, the bottoms, socks, shoes, because I want to, much like you for getting your water bottles when we were at the try last summer, I want to make sure I don't forget anything. So I
Yeah.
put it all directly next to each other so that if I do forget it, it was literally right in front of me. Because yeah, you left them in the fridge. You wanted that cold water. So
Uh,
I
I
remember
did
very
ask
well.
someone to let me not forget. I forgot who that guy was. I was like, no one. I was like, don't let me forget these. I feel like I'm going to forget them, and yeah, I forgot them.
Oh
And that's
yeah.
actually the only time I've ever forgotten.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, like a
go figure.
casual day where it's like 94
Oh,
degrees at the start of a triathlon.
every time there was water, I was just like, taking it and chugging it. So yeah, they love you.
Well, let's talk about, so it's kind of speaking on a similar topic here. I think a lot of people have questions about like fueling on race day because it's
Yeah,
such a different kind of stimulus usually than your training runs. Training, you wake up, you're in the comfort of your own home. You
yeah,
may eat, you may not. You're out the door, you're back, you're right there. But the race is, sometimes it can be an hour, 2 hours in between. Sometimes it can be for like the big city races, like three,
yeah.
4+ hours of wake up to race. So, any tips or tricks on just navigating kind of a race morning in terms of pre-run fuel?
Yeah. So pre-run fuel, it can be tricky for people. So I get a lot of people who are like, I don't like to eat anything on training runs or, right before, especially long runs. And I really try to push those people to find something that in training that they can start getting used to for long runs. And we'll have like whenever the big long run is, I say like we're not going to simulate pace, but we're going to simulate nutrition from like breakfast on, and not necessarily the timing, right? Like pre-race, I like around 3 hours or so. Like especially for the bigger
Mhm.
ones. New York City is the toughest one because you got to, you basically hurry up and wait.
Mm.
So I tell people like bring a peanut butter and jelly sandwich just to snack on, and while you're sitting there because you're waiting a while. But it's just finding something that has some carbs, some protein. I think a lot of people are in super carb, everything carb, 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 and protein helps stabilize blood sugar, and so you don't have this like spike and crash. So I try to get people to get a little bit of like, whether that's a scoop of peanut butter, a little bit of yogurt. Some people don't like dairy before. Sometimes I'll get like grilled chicken the night before and save something for in the morning. But I'm generally like a peanut butter guy, along with my oatmeal, just to get some protein in there. So I try to get people to practice it a little bit and start having those conversations early on, so that race day there's not much that is new, because GI issues can really pop up with all the gels and the stress of the event and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, and I like what you said. That's 3 hours usually for me is the cutoff of where I want to like have that kind of carb protein
Yep.
blend. Like peanut butter works very well for me as well. I know like some people can have some issues with peanut butter. So you know make a great point. You want to certainly make sure you tested it in training. And then is there any point like leading into your race where you stop taking any sort of nutrition like food, fluids, etc.?
Yeah, so I think that's to tolerance. I tend to be like a really big eater and drinker. Like, I don't know if it's nerves, but I'm always like consuming. Even in college, like we would get meal money and we'd go to the grocery store, and most people would save the money for beer later in the evening, and I would spend my entire $20. And this is like early 2000s, so it went, I went a little bit further, but I would eat. For me, is like basically like a like 45, like an hour was like kind of my cutoff. So I could do like a
Yeah.
bite of a bagel or something like that. At the time, it wasn't gels. These days, it's like, kind of an hour I stop. I don't really do the gels before race thing. Um, I understand it. There's just something in me that's like, like we're, especially caffeine, like we're already jacked up, ready to go. And then we're doing caffeine plus sugar. And it's like, you wonder why we're not pacing properly for the first little bit. So I'm just like, kind of like, let's get into the race, particularly for a half marathon. Like, most people aren't like warming up much, and we'll talk about that, but we don't need a lot, before that, per se. I would rather get it, a nice solid breakfast, wait a little bit, maybe snack on something up to an hour and hydrate, and maybe like I'll have liquid calories for
Mhm.
sure, like little sip here or there, like a couple minutes before, and then it's in race nutrition from there. And
For sure.
that's me personally, but everyone has, you know, some people have a kind of weaker tummies, and I would say this is be careful deciding that you have a weak stomach. That's kind of my soapbox these days. That people are like, this gel didn't agree with me, or I didn't like this, so I'm never doing it again. And I just find these people end up perpetually in like hunting for that magic thing that's not going to upset their stomach. And so I think it's more of exposure. Like you have to like get more exposure to it, um, especially in these high carb. The back end being in the high carb phase of,
Mhm.
which is, we shouldn't be doing what the elites are doing. They have different metabolic systems. Like they're like furnaces ready to burn and ready to go. And it's a little bit different. So I would say find something. If you have an issue, just kind of keep trying,
Mhm.
because you definitely need calories. You definitely need nutrition. Like before, after, during it all. So yeah.
Yeah, just like you train it like anything else. It does. It's not something like eating on the run doesn't come naturally. It
Yeah.
has to be trained. So you mentioned race start, and I think I see a lot of people like race starts are problematic, right? You see it at all levels. You see
Yeah.
it like beginners to pros, like race starts are tricky. So any tips, especially thinking about the half marathon of like kind of going in for like that first mile or two?
Yeah. This is this is where I see a lot of people make mistakes, and I probably spend the most time discussing with clients who are racing, whether it's a consultation or particularly on our one-on-one coaching stuff, where we're having these conversations, a lot, right? And as some of my clients can say, like I tend to not try to. I tend not to feel like I'm trying to be authoritarian, but I will definitely be firm. you know, in this idea of like, we have a plan going in, and I think we talked about that last time. Is like, how do you stick to a plan and whatnot? And if there's anything, it's just plan the first 25% of the race and that will set you up for making the common mistakes. And most people will be like, "Oh, I didn't finish strong at the end, and I need more training. I need more strength work. My legs fell apart. I need more long runs. I need more workouts." And it's like, if I look at their heart rates and stuff in the beginning of the race, I'm like, yeah, it wasn't like absurd, but it was enough to like set you up on a path of like you just didn't correct it ever, and especially on hot days like Tokyo was hot, and
Mhm.
people like stick to the plan, and it can backfire, right? So for me, I'm like, the first 25% is non-negotiable. If you follow that, and then we kind of make adjustments going throughout the
Yep.
race, like that's kind of on you. But if you don't follow the first 25%, I feel sorry for you when you blow up if you end up in the mid tent. But I'm sleeping well at night. I've told you a million times, like, do not run faster. Um, so it becomes, so to me, it's like I break it up into quarters. So a marathon is 42 kilometers. So let's say 4 10Ks.
Mhm.
Half is 21 kilometers. So 20K, so 4 5Ks. So
Mhm.
the first 5K of a half, or the first 10K of a marathon, 10K in thirds, right? Like 3 2 miles, 5K 3 1 miles, right? So
Yep.
the first kind of 25 to 30% of the race, I say smooth, right? You should be
Mhm.
smooth. And when I program in one-on-one coaching with the progression runs, I ask people to like start the first 2 miles or mile at a shuffle, and they're always
Okay.
running too fast. And I'm like, you have to pull back. Well, like, it's so slow. And I'm like, what we're working on is not your physiology here. What we're working on is the tactic and strategy to be patient, all right, and to know that you'll be able to pick up the pace throughout the rest of the race. And we
Mhm.
won't be that drastic in a race, but that mentality of like everyone's running past you or everyone's running away from you, right? So if you can really stick to your strategy of being smooth and within your pace range, right? Whatever you have planned,
Yep.
but you should have a range, not a set number, right? Like, I want to run this time in X pace, so I'm going to average X pace. I tend to build a buffer a little bit lower than the pace the first half or the first quarter. Then I get like plus or minus of the pace, and then kind of keep that. And maybe you're at the upper end, and then a little bit faster through, right? And this banking time thing, and people, it gets tough with that. So sorry, long winded, but first 25%, be smooth, be in control. Don't worry about what other people are doing. I bet you're going to run more people down at the end and have a better race and feel better and stronger than if you try to keep up with everyone or be straight on your pace right away. That's my own personal belief. So,
I like it. Now, just controlled at the start for sure. Easier said than done, but it's such an important way to start a race. I always say it's like races aren't won or lost in the first 3 miles, but they can certainly, or aren't won in the first mile, but they can certainly be lost more so.
yeah.
Because a bad start can really set you up for failure over the rest of the day. So really being keyed in there.
Yep.
And so you kind of talked about, so you break the course up in, was it 4 or 5K? So into
Yep.
quarters. That's
Yeah.
how you
Four or
kind of
five
like
Ks.
plan it. And
Yeah.
in
Because, good.
oh yeah, I was going to say outside of that first start, just was curious, like your idea when you're talking to people or when you're running yourself of like how you think about pacing for a race of this duration.
Yeah. So humans are like, we can remember things like, it's called chunking, right? Threes and fours, right? Phone numbers, right? Different stuff. So I try to make it like what's easy to remember, right? Because if you have all these pace ranges and different stuff, and again, in coaching, right, we can program it on the watch, and it buzzes at them, beeps at them, and all that stuff, right? But I look at it as 4 5Ks,
Hmm.
and there's a reason why my newsletter is called Progression. All my clients, I'm like, just be progressive, in races, in training runs, in most workouts, just like get a sense of where you're at and go from there, right? So I equate it to smooth first 5K, steady second 5K, get to halfway with like not feeling like you're racing, right? Get to
Hmm.
5K feeling like you're running like a good workout, like you're on it. And then the next 5K, I say building effort.
Mm.
All right, like we got to start putting more effort in to run the same pace,
Okay.
depending on the terrain, right? But you need to
Hmm.
start building effort because we're starting to fatigue there. And then the last 5K, finish strong. That's where you really lay it out there. If you're strong anywhere else, it's hard to sustain.
Yeah.
So smooth, steady, building effort, strong. And it's not my stole from, how I race personally, but like when I was coaching the 400, it was like we broke it up into hundreds,
Mhm.
800s, we broke up into 200s, 16, we broke up into four quarters. So smooth, steady, building effort, strong.
I like it. I'm not familiar with that. I have not heard that, and yeah, I am a fan for sure. So, and then I think once you're finishing strong, very important question before we go on to people's question is what is your go-to finish line pose to make sure you get the shot? You got to nail that finish line shot,
You're asking the wrong person, man. Every race photo I have, it is. I don't think I ever post them. Like when we get them from like, I'm in race mode all the way through the line, and it's ugly. Funny enough, I was talking about it today with my chiropractor of a race that we did, and I was talking about like I had one race where like someone was talking crap and they really shouldn't have been, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna lay down the law and let my legs do the talking. And I finished like pointing at the clock because I broke the
right?
course record by quite a bit. And it's just I let my legs do the talking, but I pointed at the numbers, right? So I'm always amazed at my clients sending me pictures of like, smiling, and I'm like, my face is all twisted, like I'm dripping sweat, like even when races like Laurel taking pictures of me, like I'm like, oh my god, like
Oh yeah.
so I'm the worst. What's yours? Mine
Mine
are
is
bad.
that mine is I only have one rule and I always like to share it as we're going into this with the half marathon, which is do not do not let your race photo be reaching for it to stop your watch. Like that this
That's
is the
me.
worst race photo. This is no celebration whatsoever. So come across like hands up,
That's
like
me. Too
muscle
much
pose,
business.
whatever it
Too
is,
much
but not
business.
reaching for the watch. Wait till you are at least like 20 feet on the other side of the finish line. Strava can deal that it's about like 5 seconds longer to make sure you get that solid photo. So that's all I
Yeah.
care.
Maybe I cut my teeth when we didn't have Strava and you wanted to double check the race time and you wanted to know it before it came out in print. Like someone hand typed it into the website. So I'm running through the line, and it's something I've consciously tried to be a little bit better about. But you take the cake there, boss.
Oh, clear.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna jump into a couple questions that
Yep.
came up from people, and there's some good ones here. I think so. This happens a lot. I think obviously, like people with multiple races, or you're following a plan, but really your race is a few weeks later. You've been training with somebody. I see it once again, all levels. It's like training groups start to break up in different runs, or it's at different points. So the question finally was, I've been following the half plan, which brings them to right now. But however, my half marathon isn't until end of April. So I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit,
Yeah.
like I often do, and kind of ask you, like, if you've been training, you've been kind of training according to the group, the plan, etc., but you need to now kind of extend your peak for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
How would you go about that?
Yeah. So it also, if they started when we started, right? Another
Hmm.
4 weeks on 8 weeks it's totally fine, right? And
Yeah.
so I would just continue like 4 weeks going into half. If we went 8 weeks, like I would try to get like maybe one more key workout in, like one or two more key workouts, and like a couple more long runs. Like to me, I like tapering for like 2 weeks for a half. Like in that amount of time, I'd probably start unloading volume 2 weeks out with like a little bit of intensity, like on the end of the second week or the first week going in, just to make sure we were feeling fresh or like poppy. Um, but yeah, I would kind of maintain where we well because we kind of unloaded a little volume, so I would like kind of pick volume back up a little bit, but not a whole ton. Maybe a couple miles on the long run, and kind of get back to what we were doing maybe a couple weeks ago. So I wouldn't like slam double. I wouldn't stay at the tapering amount. Like I would add a little bit more for 2 weeks, and then I'd cut back another 2 weeks. So you can extend tapers, so everyone thinks like, excuse me, not everyone, but I think it's common for
Yeah.
people to think that tapering is this like magical, like you nailed it, it's like roulette, black or red, and like you nailed it on the day. You can like in professional running, like in track races, like they race all summer long in Europe,
Hmm.
and they basically try to get in peak fitness, and then they maintain peak fitness for like a couple weeks, right? Like even in the Olympics, they got to peak for the trials, and then a couple months later, like peak again, right? So you can have multiple peaks. So in that instance, I would say, um, it's just some people like slam back into it, and you kind of ease back into it, and then come back down. So it's definitely doable, but you gotta apply a little bit more pressure.
Yeah. So, yeah, go back to that peak we were at, and shouldn't have any problem holding it for a few more weeks, kind
Yep.
of at that level there, and then take the proper taper, as you're saying, going
Yep.
into it. So,
Yep.
I like 2 weeks as well.
Yep.
Our next question here was, so I've been doing the plan and I've been doing half marathon pace intervals. I really like this question, by the way.
Hmm.
So I'm excited for this one. I'm very excited for your answer to it. Now I'll restart the question now, which is, I've been doing the plan and been doing the half marathon pace intervals. How do I know I can hold that pace for 13 and the 10th miles when I've only done it in short spurts?
Mm. Okay. Yeah, I get this. This is a pretty common conclusion, right? Like if I haven't done it for the totality, then how is it possible that I'm going to, right?
Mhm.
And so I think we first start with like what is the purpose of a workout, right? And the purpose of a workout, depending on what the uh, like threshold or whatever, but we're talking about pace work. So when we're doing pace work, um, we I taught there's a concept like training density, like in Training Peaks with our one-on-one clients. Like there's training stress score, which is like essentially it's a conglomerate of metrics, but essentially we can say it as like intensity times duration, right? So if you're like a peak heart rate for 10 minutes, that's going to be a lot different than, you know, uh, 50% of that heart rate for 2 hours, right? Like they're totally different, but they might get the same density. But one is very acute, like an FTP test, and one's like a long run, building up to pace work. So when we're doing pace work, though, if you ended up doing 13.1 miles at pace work, that's the race, right? And so it's too big of a stimulus. It's too dense for us to manage and absorb, right? We'd have to recover and all this. So when we do pace specific work, we're putting it into manageable chunks, all right? And when we're writing workouts in that sense, often for my clients, I'm thinking of like, what are we doing in this build? But what are we doing for this year? And what are we doing for these next 4 years, right? Because some things take many years of getting exposure to that pace. And each race gets closer, but the training is kind of there. So if I'm understanding the question is like, how am I going to be able to go from doing, say, like, let's just say like 6 by mile, we'll say half, right? 6 by mile at pace, which I know we didn't do, but let's just say for the answer, how am I going to handle that for 13? And that's the whole point of like when you did that 6 by mile or these workouts, your mileage and everything, the density of all your training for the week was much higher, right? So when you're doing that workout, you have a lot more fatigue. And so when we start unloading volume and tapering, we're kind of filling in the gaps between like the recovery gaps of like connecting each interval, not necessarily, but like metaphorically, like you're able to sustain more. And that's the whole point of a taper is to be able to sustain more than you have done in training. And the problem that people get into is that it's like logically, like if I did X, then that means I can't do Y. Like if I haven't done it for all the distances or I haven't even run whatever, then I can't do it. And you don't know on the day. Hopefully you're tapering, you absorbed all your training. But this is why if you get greedy, race week, do more than you're supposed to, right? It all comes into the full picture. Is like this is really about confidence, right? Like we all have insecurities, but if you let those insecurities drive your behavior, someone once said like, like you can't be brave or have courage without the presence of fear. So we're all afraid we're not going to run the pace or hit the time we want, but you got to give yourself the best chance to absorb all the training so you can kind of fill in all those gaps. So um, I don't know that maybe I answered it, but
Yeah, well, and at a certain point, right?
anything
Like
to add?
the answer, because you said it comes up a lot, and it's not always the most satisfactory. But you're like, well, at some point, you just have to like kind of do it. And it might work, and it might not, and it might be hot, and you might have to adjust. And these races are long enough where like you can feel good, feel bad, feel good, feel bad, and feel good again.
Yep.
Like all within the scope of one time. But yeah, to your point, it's like you take your rest, you show up, and you give it a go. And you know the real difference of it, and it'll pivot us into our kind of final question here is, you know, when you we walk away from these training sessions, right, and our or even our long runs, like the goal is that really you're working out tomorrow, like tomorrow, maybe the next day, you're taking the 24 hours off. And
Yeah.
the goal of these races is that you kind of lay it all on the line. And you know, it might be a week, it might be 2 weeks before you're like, you know, ultimately back at it, and you know, back to tip top shape. So you kind of take it to this level that you just haven't taken it in training, and push for it. So
Yeah, it's like like you're just it's like that's a great point, and I just want to like double click on it. Is like, and maybe say it in a little different way. It's like a race is just an opportunity to see where you're at,
sure.
and you can't see where you're at if you don't pace yourself earlier. That's not going to give you your best opportunity to have your best race. You're also not going to get there if you're not at your pace and you give up or you shut it down. You won't know, right? And if we really think about it as like races, as we can use them building to things, they're the biggest stimulus in our training, right? That we have to adapt to. So my biggest thing is like your race is the opportunity to see where you're at today on that course, on that weather, you know, given the week you had, work wise, life wise, family wise, you know, how you're training condensed all in. What did you absorb? There's so many variables here. Just go give it your best shot. That's where we're at today. You're
Yeah.
not your half marathon PR, right? I'm not my SAT score, thank the Lord, or my GPA, right? So, you know, it's just an opportunity to see where you're at. So,
Yeah.
yeah, to link in all the pacing is you'll get much closer, and then incrementally over time, you'll be able to handle more volume. Your body will be exposed to it more and more and more, and then you can do a little bit more. So maybe there's a long run where you can run 6 to 8 miles at half marathon pace, you know, but that's like a very high level, you know, like a lot of exposure. You have to be training many years and be able to recover. So
Yeah.
chip away at it, right? Okay. So
I don't run 6 miles at half marathon.
yeah,
Yeah, I think a wise man once said, "Race early and often on these things." At some point, so you know those B races become really excellent tune-ups for these A races.
yeah,
So, and anyway, final question here, which and so it's the recovery piece of the pie, right? So we're not
yeah,
going to get to talk to everybody on the flip side of it. Everything has gone exceedingly well. And I'm going to break this because the question actually came about the marathon, but I want to do it two ways. So we're going to start with the marathon, and we're going to go to the half marathon. You recently had a guy run a marathon, right? So the question is, after the marathon, when are you like? How long are you taking, and when are you able to kind of get back in and start training, especially if you've got a race, maybe another race like 6, 7 weeks down the line?
yeah. So to me, it's like I call it. I think I mentioned it before, but I call it the post race super boost.
Hmm.
And the way to get it is, again, the race is the biggest stimuli that you'll get. It's the most dense, you know, session you'll have, right? So if I'm going to recover off a workout, you know, we really have to recover after the race. And I think let's talk about the marathon, right? So Tokyo just happened. And so a marathon for me is like, it's really like, uh, so the like week one is like biking, movement, swimming, whatever you have access to is as non-pounding, and then I run at the end of the week. Some circuit lifting, like a couple off days. You know, particularly the first 2 days post marathon is like moving. Like you have to move to get fresh blood in. I say like a parade happened and it left all the confetti and everything out after everyone's done. Like you need the street sweepers to go in and clean. That's fresh blood, right? They're going to go clean the streets, right? And so you got to move even though you don't want to, and then take off, and then we'll bike and off and whatever. So first week is mostly like movement without like really running. And then the second week, I start getting people back into a little bit more running, but not a lot of intensity, but still like maybe 2 off days instead of 3 off days.
Hmm.
And it takes much longer. Like, so first week, like a couple days, you're sore, it makes sense, right? Then by the end of the week and then into the early next week, like you're tired and it makes sense, right? Like walking upstairs, like these things like match to like, okay, I just ran, you know, a marathon or a half marathon, right? But what doesn't match up is like how your tendons are recovering, because they don't get a lot of blood flow. So you're not like, oh, like you might feel your Achilles or stuff, but like that's more muscle than tendon if you ran okay and you're healthy. And so tendon health takes a really long time to recover for. This is why Achilles tendonitis or any tendon like plantar fasciitis, I mean, it takes a long time because it doesn't get blood flow. So like the hip complex, hip flexor, like all these things in these areas that took a lot of pounding take a long time to recover. So for me, after a half, it's like 7 to 10 days. For a full, it's more like 2 weeks. Like where I'm like very conscientious to get people to stop. By that point, people are like, I'm ready to go. And then what always happens is like week 2, they're like, I'm ready to go. I'm like, no, you're not after a marathon. Like, let's just keep it easy. And then week 3, they're like, oh, okay, maybe I wasn't ready last week, but now I'm ready this week. I feel better. And I'm like, no, not yet. And then the 4th week is like, okay, I feel back to myself.
Yeah.
And generally that's true. So a marathon, I say 4 weeks, tread lightly. Half, I would say 2 weeks, tread lightly. And that's where you absorb everything. So if you do a race or half or a full, and you only take a couple days off, and then in 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, you have fasciitis or something, I can almost guarantee it's because you got back to training too soon. And you'll be like, oh, it's something here. And it's like, no, you just did not give enough time after your race. Okay. So when people sign up for things like 6 weeks after a full, so I people that uh, a couple that I coach that did Berlin and Chicago, or Berlin and New York, and it's not my favorite thing. I don't like 2 marathons a year. I
Yeah.
really don't like 3 marathons a year.
2
For
marathons
longer,
within 2 weeks, or
yeah. So they did Berlin and New York. So there was a little bit. It was 6 weeks difference. And the biggest thing I focused on, it was like, we're going to take 4 weeks to recover the same way we would, and that's going to give you the best shot to do well.
yeah.
And we're not going to hunt a long run. We just have to recover and absorb everything. And then you'll feel much better than trying to stuff training in. And people stuff training in, and then they're shot. And then they go into the holiday season and winter, like really beat up. And it might work 1 year, but like, it's not going to work, year in and year out. There's some people that can, but most of us can't. So I would say be cautious signing up for races after, but marathon 4 weeks, light, and slowly building and being more cautious. Less is more. Half, I would say 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah, and in my opinion, for this particular question submitter, yeah, 421 to a half on 6-1. All you're trying to do, you can't rush the recovery process just because the race is coming up. It's still a 4-week process to like kind of get through and get back. And at that point, all you're trying to do is like get a little bit back into routine and go have a decent run. But take the pressure off of the cover bridges half and have fun with it. Hopefully be in celebration of Boston. You made it to Boston, you run it, and take the next one a little bit easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because what happens? We get into like, oh, I need to train, like training to, and it's like, no, it's you're in like a recovery mode. So awesome.
Sure.
I think that's it, right?
That's it. That's it for this half marathon challenge. We can't wait to see everyone here in New York on Saturday. If you can make it for the Shakeout Run, we'll certainly be out also in and around the NYC half weekend in general. But Justin, thanks so much again for being here. Thanks to everyone for participating again in another round of our half marathon program. I'm super pumped for everyone to come back here in a few weeks and kickstart the spring with Coach Justin here, and naturally reach out anytime. I'll be here to answer questions as well. But Justin, thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll see everybody here soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, John. Thank you for everything you did, building it up and everything. So we appreciate you.
See you, everybody.
Later.